Now, for more on Africa's efforts to address recycling and other environmental protection measures, we're joined by Emira Woods, Global Client Principal for Social Impact Programs at ThoughtWorks. Welcome back to the show.
Great to be with you.
Now, it's interesting, Emira, as we look at sub-Saharan Africa, this amount of plastic waste, what's the scale of this problem and what are governments doing to address it?
Well, the plastic wastes are really, becoming such a critical issue all across the continent, and looking at climate change and its detrimental effects all over the continent, from rising sea levels, particularly West Africa, where all of the capital cities are on the coast, already suffering the impacts of the sea change. You also see increased desertification, the mudslides in Sierra Leone. The list is long of the not future, but already visible signs of global warming throughout the continent. And I think it is because of that that you have social movements across the continent organizing. I'm really honored to be a part of Africans Rising for Justice, Peace, and Dignity, one of the platforms bringing environmental justice activists together, human rights activists together, basically demanding attention to climate change and global warming. And it is this pressure from social movements that has forced governments like the Paris Agreement, the African governments taking the lead to insist that the entire world pay attention to issues of climate change and to act immediately to prevent the catastrophe that we're all seeing. So these elements, the plastic ban already in place in Kenya, being put forward in Uganda, in a number of other countries, South Sudan, these are efforts to stem this tide that many see is already causing detrimental impacts, not only on the planet, but on people.
And we certainly seem to have reached a tipping point, and it's something that both developed and developing nations are struggling to deal with, especially this plastic bag waste. But how much progress is being made in terms of the policies to really deter plastic use and really look for better alternatives?
Well, that's the thing. You have strong lobbies, the chemical manufacturing companies and others that are lobbying to make sure that regulations are lifted that would try to curb these types of rampant abuses of plastics around our planet. So, so the force is strong against it. But I believe that the tide is shifting, where particularly young people are much more conscious of what's happening in the planet around them and what their personal responsibility needs to be. But let's be frank, it is not only the issue of plastics. It's pushing for an end to a dependence on fossil fuel economies. It's pushing for further renewables, greater investment in wind, in solar, in these renewable energies that will ultimately protect people and the planet for now and for future generations.
Because one of the things people don't think about, the fossil fuels that even go into making these plastic bags.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's almost like, ripple effects. It's not only the effects of the plastic bags around the continent, around the world, but it's also, the chemicals that it took to actually produce those plastics and what happens with the waste that never deteriorates across our planet. So, so I think efforts are needed on the level of governments to increase the regulation, to make sure that they are monitoring this situation, not only putting the rules on the books, but enforcing to make sure that this tide is turned, but also to move away from fossil fuel economies, both in Africa and around the world.
Now, it's interesting because Kenya actually introduced the world's toughest plastic bag laws this year. Basically, producing, selling, or using plastic bags illegal will cost you $40,000 or 4 years in jail. You have other countries like China and France implementing some of these partial bans and taxes on these single-use bags. How effective are these strategies, though?
Well, I think you need a role for government to say enough is enough. We've got to protect the interests of our people now and into the future. So I think these efforts are to be applauded. And actually, it is countries in the global south that are leapfrogging, to be quite honest, right? That are taking the lead in terms of these environmental protections. And when you see, especially now in the US, an environmental protection agency that's under attack, I think it will take the countries of the global south to actually take the stand that's needed to protect the planet now and into the future.
All right, well, thank you so much. We'll have to leave it there, unfortunately. Emira Woods, Global Client Principal for Social Impact Programs at ThoughtWorks. Thank you for joining us.